Coming to the question of housing society, we have had housing societies which say ki no non-vegetarians allowed, only vegetarians. Then they tend to say that no bachelors allowed, no this allowed. Well, fact remains that a housing society, it's under the Maharashtra Cooperative Housing Societies Act, the domain is very limited. It is limited to managing the affairs and maintenance of the society, and the society's writ only extends to the common areas like building, parking, lobbies, etc. It has no control whatsoever in respect of the area inside the flats.
Hello and welcome to Housing.com. I'm Chamur Ghosh, Editor-in-Chief Housing.com News, and our guest today, Aditya Pratap, who's an advocate with the Bombay High Court, will be speaking to us about some of the major pain points that we face in the renting process. Aditya, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Umur. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd like to start off with the most obvious pain point, which I think is something that both tenants and landlords grapple with, and that's the security deposit.
Correct.
So there doesn't seem to be any kind of standardization in terms of how many months of rent as a landlord can I expect. Tenants are often insecure, as to whether they'll get the entire security deposit back. What's your take on this? How do we navigate this tricky situation?
Well, when we see a security deposit, the purpose of a security deposit is to be a contingency fund in case the licensee fails to pay the rent or the license fee in correct parlance, or he damages the property. Then instead of filing a lengthy civil suit, the licensor or the landlord, he can deduct such certain sum from the security deposit and make an allowance. However, unfortunately, it appears even after the licensee pays this, and I'll just make a point here, I'll use licensor, licensee, because landlord and tenant in legal parlance has a very, very different connotation. So, especially when I draft my leave and license agreements for my clients, I explicitly avoid using words like landlord, tenant and all these things because they create vested rights in the property. Now, coming back to the main question, is that when a person takes a flat on rent, he pays a security deposit to the landlord. And however, when the time comes for repayment of the security deposit, the landlord's intentions they turn adverse. Every landlord thinks that when the security deposit has come to me, it is like a windfall. Arey, 10 lakh rupees security deposit aa gaye, 15 lakh aa gaye, chalo party kare. This is wrong. I advise my clients that the moment you receive a security deposit, as it is interest free, you're getting it. Don't misappropriate. Keep it in reserve. And similarly, when the time comes for return, your agreement should have a foolproof mechanism to determine how much money should be deducted and how much should be refunded to the licensee, which is the renter.
Now, you're speaking about the agreement, and we were discussing this earlier, where a lot of people are being penny wise and pound foolish, and they're just doing like a rupees 100 kind of a franking. They're not getting the agreement registered. What advice would you give to people who are doing that? How important is it to register the agreement?
Well, our legendary Chanakya has said, get your formalities right. Similarly, I tell people, what's the harm in spending an extra penny, an extra amount, and getting the property registered? The biggest objective of the Indian Registration Act and the Stamp Acts is to ensure that the state gets the revenue and in return you get protection of your property. So, which is why, while under the Registration Act, agreement, leave and license agreements of less than 11 months, less than 12 months. So, if you do an 11-month agreement, it does not require registration. But the moment you do a 2-year or 3-year agreement, you should register it. The registration fees in Maharashtra is only 30,000 rupees. And similarly, the stamp duty will be in accordance, it won't be much. It will be in accordance with the schedule of the Stamp Act and the articles prescribed.
And this you're referring to the commercial leases, I suppose. So it would be much lesser for residential properties.
That is as per the schedule of the Stamp Act, and they have prescribed a very elaborate mechanism for computing the leave and license fees.
So now see, the security deposit is also linked to the main loophole that's used, and that's the wear and tear of the premises. So it works both ways. We've seen tenants who've used the homes so badly that the security deposit does not even cover the repairs required, and vice versa. We've seen landlords who've tried to appropriate funds saying, oh, there's a huge amount of repairs required. So in terms of the agreement that they're drawing up, how do you think both parties can protect their interests?
Correct. Now, under the Transfer of Property Act, both the licensor and the licensee have their obligations. the licensee has is duty bound to ensure that the premises is used properly, there is no damage caused. At the same time, Section 108 of the Transfer of Property Act prescribes that the licensee shall not be liable for any wear and tear of the property, any reasonable wear and tear of the property. So the law assumes weathering is a natural act of nature. You have the sun, you have the wind. Paint has to normally fade away over time. Even minor crevasses or cracks may appear in the plaster, minor. Some wear and tear has to happen as a law of nature, which is why Section 108 of the Transfer of Property Act very clearly says that a licensee cannot be held liable for natural and reasonable wear and tear to the property. However, many a times the landlords, just to foot their bill of doing up the house and in a bid to exploit the licensees, just because they have the money, they say, no, we will not refund the security deposit to you. At the same time, so in such a case, the licensee has no option other than filing a suit to recover the quantum of security deposit.
But if he had put all of these things down very clearly in the rent agreement, do you think it would sort of, help him? Would it make his case stronger?
Well, first of all, even if he does not put this clause in the in the license agreement, Section 108 of the Transfer of Property Act, it is the law of the land. It is very much applicable in force that whether you have the condition or not, any reasonable wear and tear will not be chargeable to the licensee. Repainting the premises, that is something the licensor has to do. However, if the licensee damages the plaster, he makes holes in the walls.
And that happens.
Yes, that does happen. And if he damages the flooring through putting in heavy items which he's not supposed to, then yes, then the licensor has the right to deduct a portion of the security deposit and seek the relevant compensation.
So it's just better to put all of these clauses down with utmost clarity in the agreement and sort of get it registered, so that way both parties just feel more secure and safer about the whole thing. So that brings me to my last question. Now that we're talking about the responsibilities of both the parties, of late we've seen a trend even in the major metros where a lot of control is being exerted on the and I'm going to use the layman's terms, and that's the tenant, people who are living on rent, on their lifestyles, what choices are they making, what food are they eating, whether they can have house guests or not. What is the legal take on this? Is this even allowed? How does this work?
Well, legally, right to consume food is a constitutional right under Article 21. Okay. This is the supreme fundamental right to life, and no one can even intrude into this. Okay. Your fundamental right to life under Article 21 includes your right to consume and carry your own food. And this right cannot be waived and it cannot be snatched. So no one can make you sign an agreement and saying that you will not consume this food, that food. That is not possible. You can eat any food you want and no one can restrict you. Coming to the question of housing society, we have had housing societies which say ki no non-vegetarians allowed, only vegetarians. Then they tend to say that no bachelors allowed, no this allowed. Well, fact remains that a housing society, it's under the Maharashtra Cooperative Housing Societies Act, the domain is very limited. It is limited to managing the affairs and maintenance of the society, and the society's writ only extends to the common areas like building, parking, lobbies, etc. It has no control whatsoever in respect of the area inside the flats. And secondly, it cannot restrict the personal choices of its members. And we also have the Bombay High Court judgment in the Talmaki Cooperative Housing Society case, which specifically prohibits a society from making any distinctions on race, gender or culture, etc.
And we've had judgments like that from high courts across various states.
Correct.
Yeah.
We have that. And finally, we also, like for instance, the Cooperative Housing Societies Act also prohibits a housing society from discriminating. So we have the law of the land which says that a housing society cannot discriminate among its members, it cannot discriminate against others, and it has no powers whatsoever to regulate the personal lives of the people living in the building.
Okay, that's great. So that's a great insight. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you got some insights into how the renting process works. Great to have you on board. Please keep track of us on Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.